Technically not live, but we are back for another exciting episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping. This is the 7th episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with your host, Kenneth the K-Rock Klein, I shouldn't say former, but co-host of previous podcast, Two Pals on a Pod. And now this is my own gig, of course, where I give my opinions on certain sports subjects, which many of you people may not be aware of, or maybe you are aware of. You just don't have a good reason to talk about it. But don't worry, folks. I'm your eyes and your ears and your mouth and your nose, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Okay, we need to grow up. We're no longer little kids here, unless you have kids. If all the kids are listening, hi there. Anyways, today we got a real interesting show. When I say we, I mean I. I have a real interesting show for y'all. As a matter of fact, I am going to be doing a top 10 list today. That's right. I'm going to be talking about my opinion, the top 10 one-sided sports rivalries in all the sports world, historically or in the current world as of right now. But I'm talking about one-sided sports rivalries. I'll get more into details on that in just a moment. And then J.J. Watt apparently is making some news. Is he going to come back? Is he going to play again? Who knows? I get my thoughts on the whole matter. But first and foremost, folks, I got some exciting news for y'all. I am actually going to be moving this podcast to a Podbean. That's right, I'm going to be branching out more into the audio version and having this podcast on Podbean, so that way y'all can listen to it instead of subscribing to my channel and watching all the YouTube versions, because in all fairness to YouTube, even though they have some audio programs on here, it's really more for watching visually, if you know what I mean, visual movies and all that. But I've decided to move out to the audio version, so that way you don't have to worry about watching something on the screen. The picture that you see of the crocodile in a cowboy hat, you don't have to look at that every single time. You can just listen to me talk and blabber about the things that, in my mind, are worth talking about, and just, have some intakes as well. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be going away from YouTube. I'm still going to post these videos out on YouTube, but I'm also going to be adding more audio versions. So it's going to be on Podbean, and hopefully I can get it on Apple Podcasts, so that way it can be easier for y'all to subscribe to my channel as well. So that is the news I have in store for y'all. And folks, we are going to step aside just real fast, but when we do, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 one-sided rivalries. I'll get more into details on that when we come back. Folks, we are back, and it's time for the first segment of today's show. And folks, I gotta be honest with you. Over the weekend, I was watching a hockey game. Well, technically Game 7 of the hockey playoff series between the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this was a very big deal because apparently this was the fourth time in the last decade that the Bruins and the Maple Leafs had met each other. Toronto has not won a Stanley Cup since 1967, while the Boston Bruins were having a little bit of pressure on them. You see, the Bruins had started the series leading 3-1, but the Maple Leafs won games 5 and 6 to bring the series back to Boston for Game 7. And if Boston had lost Game 7, it would mark the first time in the history of any playoff series in any sport, Major League Baseball, NBA, and NHL, that a team had lost two consecutive playoff series in which they were up 3-1. So you can definitely see that there was a lot of pressure there. But on Toronto's end, the Maple Leafs had lost the last 6 playoff series against the Boston Bruins. The last time that they won was actually in 1959. So Toronto was trying to win their first playoff series against Boston. Since then, Boston was trying to avoid being the first team to lose back-to-back playoff series in which they led 3-1. The game was tight. It was scoreless through 2. Boston and Toronto each got a goal in the third period. It went into overtime, And I found myself pulling for Toronto just because I wanted them to kind of get over the hump of trying to beat Boston. And as it turns out, Boston ended up winning the game with the overtime goal, and that makes it 7 straight times that the Boston Bruins had defeated the Toronto Maple Leafs in the playoffs. And I'm watching all of this, and I'm saying to myself, as it's really got to be bad for Toronto. I mean, as bad as it is that they hadn't won a Stanley Cup since 1969, which is one of the oldest title droughts in the history of sports, it's probably just as bad losing to one team in a playoff series for as long as you can, particularly in the last decade when, you had you had a series where the last 4 times you met, all of them went to Game 7, and all of them were won by Boston. So, for the last 4 times that the Bruins and Maple Leafs have met each other, the Boston Bruins won in 7 games. But the more I thought about this, the more I said to myself, we all love rivalries, and I think there was a rivalry there between the Bruins and the Maple Leafs. Maybe not as historic as Boston against Montreal or so, but I'm thinking in terms of sports, everybody loves a rivalry as long as it is competitive and both teams are equal to the task and both teams have an opportunity to win against the other. Where it is rare is a one-sided playoff rivalry where you have one team of the two that pretty much wins most, if not all, the times they meet in a playoff series. And I got to thinking, I wonder what are some of the biggest one-sided rivalries in history. So what I decided to do is to come up with a top 10 list of one-sided playoff rivalries. Now, I did have to make some requirements, some rules for this list to make this a very fair list, because although there are a lot of rivalries that are one-sided, some of them are pretty short and others are just long and spread out. So here's what I had to do. I came up with 4 requirements. Number 1, these rivalries have to be in a stretch or a certain era. So I'm looking at 5 to 10 years for one team. So unfortunately for Kansas City and Buffalo, they don't meet this requirement, even though it is clearly a one-sided rivalry with Kansas City defeating Buffalo in their last 3 playoff meetings in the last 4 years. So unfortunately, Kansas City and Buffalo, you missed a mark. But if next year, if you make the playoffs and Kansas City wins, then you definitely have a case to be on the list. But I'm looking at 5 to 10 years. Number 2, both teams have to be at their peak, meaning that they are legitimate contenders to win a championship. I'm not looking for one team being superior than the other, where the other team is stuck in mediocrity, much like the Boston Celtics with Larry Bird against Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in the mid-'80s, where the Bulls were kind of in mediocrity. I'm looking at both teams being superior, strong, talented teams. Number 3, they have to meet 4 times or more in a playoff series. So even though the stretch I'm looking at is 5 to 10 years, you have to meet 4 times or more. You can't have 3 years in a row where you only meet 3 years. It has to be in a certain stretch. As long as you meet 4 times or more in that stretch, you are You fit in this list. And number 4, one team has to go either undefeated against the other team, or you can only afford to lose one time if you're the team that won the majority. So, for example, if you meet 4 times and one team has to win all 4 meetings in the playoffs, or one team has to win 3 of the 4 meetings. You can't have 2-2. It can't be 3-2 because those are kind of similar. So basically, one team has to win the majority of the battles, if not all of them. So I hope you guys understand what I'm talking about. But anyways, here we go. My top 10 one-sided rivalries. Starting off at number 10, the Detroit Red Wings and the St. Louis Blues. Now, a lot of people who follow hockey typically think of the Detroit Red Wings in that era, their arch rival being the Colorado Avalanche, all because of a controversial hit which led to a 7-year period of blood feuds where the two teams combined for 5 Stanley Cups, Detroit winning 3 and Colorado winning 2. But one of the most underrated rivalries that doesn't get talked about is the rivalry between the Detroit Red Wings and the St. Louis Blues. They were, in some ways, in a very similar division with each other, and they had some skilled players. You had Steve Yzerman, Sergei Fedorov, Brandon Shanahan on the Red Wings. You had Brett Hall, who was playing for the St. Louis Blues. And for one season, Wayne Gretzky was actually a member of the St. Louis Blues. And that was in 1996 when the teams first met in the playoffs. Detroit and St. Louis battled to a 7-game series that ended in a double overtime victory for the Red Wings, thanks to Steve Yzerman scoring a laser from the blue line. In 97 and 98, both series went 6 games, where Detroit ultimately pulled out 6-game victories and would go on to win the Stanley Cup in both years. The two teams would not meet until 2002, but there was a plot twist to this saga, and that was Brett Hall, who played for the Blues in the first 3 meetings. After spending a year or so in Dallas, winning a Stanley Cup there, he joins the Red Wings in 2002, and he is now on the opposing side. And it's the old cliche where if you can't beat them, join them. And unfortunately for the St. Louis Blues, when you lose a guy like Brett Hall, who goes on to have great success, you really have no chance against the Detroit Red Wings, who were a heavily loaded team. And that was made evident in Game 4 of that series when Chris Pronger injured himself while trying to hit Steve Yzerman, who was also dealing with a banged-up leg. The Red Wings won that series in 5 games and would win their 3rd Stanley Cup. So I have Detroit and St. Louis because Detroit won all four playoff meetings from 1996 to 2002. So a lot of people will refer to the Red Wings and Avalanche as being the big rivalry that it was, and it should be remembered as such. But the one-sided rivalry between the Red Wings and the Blues, I think, deserves a little bit more credit and respectability. Coming in at number 9, now, it's hard to find a one-sided rivalry in the NFL that meets this requirement. As I said earlier, Kansas City and Buffalo, they miss out by a mark. But there's still potential for them to meet this one-sided requirement if they both make the playoffs and Kansas City wins or Buffalo gets one. So we'll just have to wait and see. But for the time being, the only one that I can find of a one-sided rivalry that in my mind fits this requirement was the rivalry between the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings in the 1970s. Now, people remember the 70s as being a dominated decade by the Pittsburgh Steelers, who won 4 Super Bowls in a 6-year stretch. But the NFC had a 3-horse monster with the Dallas Cowboys, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Los Angeles Rams. But Minnesota and Dallas met each other 4 times, and Dallas won 3 of the 4 meetings. The first time these two teams met was a 20-12 victory in 1971 in the NFC Divisional Round. 2 years later, the Vikings get their revenge on Dallas, winning the NFC Championship 27-10. Then comes the third meeting in 1975, which is arguably the most iconic game of the rivalry series. That was the game that Roger Staubach hit Drew Pearson for a Hail Mary to beat the Vikings 17-14. In fact, that was the first time anyone had coined the phrase Hail Mary. Roger Staubach simply said, being a Catholic, he just closed his eyes, said a prayer, threw up the ball, and Drew Pearson, being his best receiver then, caught the ball. Might have gotten away with the pass interference, but he still caught the ball, went into the end zone for a touchdown, and Dallas won the game 17-14, and would then later go on to advance to the Super Bowl. The final meeting between these two teams was in 77 in the NFC Championship game. Dallas defeated Minnesota 23-6, advanced to the Super Bowl, and would win that Super Bowl in 77. And unfortunately for Minnesota, they never have won a Super Bowl to this point. So Dallas ended up winning this rivalry 3-1, while you can argue that the Cowboys won 2 Super Bowls, while Minnesota unfortunately did not. Well, you can't argue that because that's actually evidence, but this was clearly a one-sided rivalry, even though Minnesota has a win in that playoff series in hindsight. So the 1970s, the Cowboys and the Vikings in that era are my number 4 list. Number 8. This is really hard for me to talk about because it kind of hurts, but I can't deny it. The Golden State Warriors and the Houston Rockets. And unfortunately, Golden State won all 4 playoff meetings from 2015 to 2018. They first won in 2015 in the Western Conference Finals, beating Houston in 5 games. The next year, they meet up in the first round and also beat Houston in 5 games. Then comes 2018, which is arguably one of the best playoff series in recent memory. The Rockets actually led 3-2 against the Golden State team with Kevin Durant, I might add. Houston was the only team that really pushed Golden State with Kevin Durant to the limit. However, the Rockets lost the next 2 games, first because of Chris Paul suffering an injury, and then a horrible Game 7 where the Rockets missed 27 straight three-pointers, and Golden State ended up winning that game. Then in 2019, the Rockets overcame a 2-0 deficit, but the Warriors recovered to win the series in 6. So in hindsight, it's one of those eras where the Rockets had a good team, but Golden State was just better. Hopefully, the Rockets and Warriors meet up later on this in the future with Curry still on the team and the Rockets getting their revenge in a playoff situation. It almost happened this year, but Houston just couldn't get the wins to get into the play-in tournament. So that's my number 8 list. And number 7, well, I talked about this, but the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs, as I said, the last 4 times these two teams met, Boston won in 7 games in all 4 times. In 2013, Boston was down 4-1 in Game 7 before they pulled off a stunning comeback to win 5-4. The Bruins won Game 7 in 2018. They were down 4-3 going into the third period, and all of a sudden they scored like 4 goals to win 7-4. Then in 2019, it was just no contest. Toronto couldn't stand with the Bruins, who beat them 5-1. And then, of course, Game 7, where so much was at stake. Toronto had an opportunity to close out the show, but Boston came back, and they ended up winning in overtime. So it's really unfortunate that Toronto has yet to win, but for the fact that they haven't been able to succeed in the last decade or so, losing 4 times, all Game 7s, heartbreaking losses. I mean, Toronto, they're the most heartbreaking team as of right now. And a respected city like Toronto that has not won a Stanley Cup since 67, you have to think at some point they're going to overcome that. But I don't know what's wrong with them. People are going to say that they're cursed. I just think they can't get the job done at this point. Hopefully they figure that out in the near future. So that's my number 7. Number 6. Get ready, Houston fans. You're going to love this one. But it's the Houston Astros and the New York Yankees from 2015 to 2022. 4 times they met in the playoffs. All 4 times went to Houston. They first won a 1-game playoff situation, a wild card game they call it, back in 2015. The Astros winning that 3-0 behind great pitching from Dallas Keuchel. In 2017, it was a 7-game thriller series where Houston won the first 2 games at home. New York came back to win their 3 games in New York, and then Houston responded with Game 6 and Game 7 victories to close out the series in 7 games. And the Astros, of course, won the first World Series that same year. Then 2 years later, another thrilling series between the 2 squads. Houston got up to a 3-1 series lead. Then, after losing Game 5, you had that walk-off homer by Jose Altuve to win the series in Game 6 in 2019, which propelled the Astros to the World Series, though they would come up short. Then, of course, you had a little bit of drama off the field with how things were done. Yankee fans were not too happy about that. And you could tell by 2022, the Astros were determined to get back to the World Series and win it. The Yankees, of course, after winning a playoff series, they started the chant of, we won Houston, we won Houston. Oh, they won in Houston, all right, and they got Houston. As it turns out, the Astros not only won in 2022, but they swept them. So it's safe to say that the Astros owned the Yankees in the rivalry in that stretch. So Yankee fans can sit and complain, and they talk about their 27 World Series championships, but as far as their matchups with Houston, it's no contest. You couldn't beat the Astros in the playoff series. You had your chance, and you didn't. And even if you were to meet up next year or soon for a playoff matchup, and you win, it doesn't change the fact that you don't own the rivalry. No, a 4-game sweep in April does not count. Deal with it. You were not the winners of the rivalry. You lost in this one-sided matchup. So, that's the way I see it. At number 5, we stick in New York, but this time we're going to go with a little bit of hockey. It's the New York Islanders versus the New York Rangers from 1975 to 1984. 5 times these two teams met. the New York Islanders winning 4 of them. The first time these two teams met was in 1975, when was a best-of-3 first-round series. The Islanders won that series 2-1, with Game 3 going into overtime. In 79, the New York Rangers get a little bit of revenge, winning that series 4-2, but then the early 1980s were all Islanders. They won 4 straight Stanley Cups from 1980 to 1983, and then in that stretch, they beat the Rangers 3 consecutive years from 1981 to 1983. They swept them in 4. They beat the Rangers in 4-2 in 82 and in 83. And then in 84, in what was a best-of-5 first round, the Islanders and Rangers went all the way to overtime. And in a game that was a game that was coached by Herb Brooks for the New York Rangers. Herb Brooks, former 1980 U.S. Olympic coach for the team that won the famous Miracle on Ice against the Soviet Union. It was interesting to see that one of his former players on that team scored the winning goal. I'm talking Ken Morrow, who scored the winning goal for the Islanders to win the game and win the series. So that was not a good period if you were living in Manhattan, and it was a great period if you were living in Long Island. So the New York Islanders beating the Rangers 4 of the 5 matchups, because of the rivalry, because of it being New York, it's in my top 5. At number 4, we have an individual rivalry. That is Sugar Ray Robinson versus Jake LaMotta, which is arguably the best rivalry in boxing outside of Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Now, these two met 6 times in their historical career. 6 times, which is unheard of in today's world. Sugar Ray Robinson, of course, won 5 of the 6 matches. He wins the first fight by a unanimous decision, but then suffers his first loss to LaMotta, or first loss of his career, which happened to come against Jake LaMotta by a unanimous decision in the second fight. The next 2 fights were won by Sugar Ray Robinson, both by unanimous decision. Then the 5th fight between the two was a split decision victory by Robinson, and some people saw that as controversial because many think that Jake LaMotta should have won that fight. And there's an argument that he probably did. Then comes the 6th fight, and maybe the most famous fight of the bunch, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where Sugar Ray Robinson won by a TKO in the 13th round. It was the first time in LaMotta's career, legitimately, that he was knocked out. He had been knocked out earlier in the career, but that was later to be determined. The fight was fixed, which got LaMotta in some trouble. But ultimately, Jake LaMotta was technically knocked out, legitimately, of course, and Sugar Ray Robinson, who was arguably the greatest boxer pound for pound of all time, won his 5th fight against Jake LaMotta. By the way, I saw the movie Raging Bull for the first time on an airplane as we were flying from Houston to Pullman, Washington, with our women's basketball team at Lamar University to compete against Washington State in the inaugural Women's Basketball Invitational Tournament. I saw that movie just a way to calm my fears down, and I actually enjoyed it. I loved Raging Bull, and definitely an all-time classic for sure. Robert De Niro, great job acting. Now, number 3. Okay, Yankee fans, I gave you grief last time, but I'm going to help you out this time. It's the 1941 to 1956 era that saw 7 matchups between the New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Yankees won from 1941, 1947, 1949, 1952, 1953, and 1956. 6 times did the Yankees beat the Dodgers. The one time that they didn't was in 1955. And 4 of those series went 7 games, with the Yankees winning 3 of them. And that was an era where baseball was really the best when it was played in New York. You had players like Yogi Berra, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, Gil Hodges, Duke Snider, all these great players, Hall of Fame players for that matter. In fact, I don't know if Gil Hodges is in the Hall of Fame. He should be, but you also had Pee Wee Reese for the Dodgers as well. And that was a great era for baseball if you were living in New York. Of course, there was a third team with the Giants as well. The rivalry sort of ended after 56 when both the Dodgers and the Giants moved out to California. And it was really unfortunate an end to such a great era. But, you know, you're talking about a David versus Goliath situation, and more often than not, Goliath won. because, of course, it's the Yankees and they win most of the championships as well. But that era from 1941 to 1956, where we saw New York baseball at its finest, and we saw a great rivalry with the two teams in that era. Now, there have been some other occasions in which the Yankees and the Dodgers met. 63, of course, when the Dodgers swept the Yankees, but then the 78, 77, 78 World Series, both won by the Yankees, and in 81, the last time that the two teams met, with the Dodgers winning in 6 games. But the reason why I chose 1941 and 1956, it was a one-sided affair in that stretch. So therefore, you can't say that you cannot put these two teams in a one-sided list. At number 2, another individual rivalry, Bill Russell versus Wilt Chamberlain. 8 times these two great individual players met in the playoffs, and 7 times did Bill Russell come away victorious. Bill Russell, 7-1, won in 1960, 62, 64, 65, 66, 68, and 69, while Wilt Chamberlain ended up winning in 1967. So, in a sense, Bill Russell clearly had the advantage over Wilt Chamberlain. And some people will say that Wilt Chamberlain was a better player than Bill Russell, and arguably so because he put up better numbers and better stats. But a lot of people look at this as a case of winning. Bill Russell winning 11 championships in his career while Wilt Chamberlain only winning 2. It's safe to say that Bill Russell's team was better than the 76ers. You can argue that Bill Russell played a big role with his psychological methods of getting to the defenders' heads, of first allowing them to score and then shutting them down, which at that time everybody would be so cold that it would give Boston the advantage. Everybody on the opponent's side, that is. But it gave Boston the advantage at that time. So, that is a big-time rivalry there between Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, 2 of the best players ever. I'd certainly put Bill Russell as a top 5 player, and Wilt Chamberlain, that's a tough one for me. I mean, I want to put him in there, but I think it's going to be hard when you have guys like Kareem, Shaq, and Hakeem Olajuwon that I feel like are more deserving to be in a top 10 list. But it's hard to say. Both players, great players for that team, but Bill Russell clearly getting the better end of the rivalry against Wilt Chamberlain. And number 1, needless to say, it's the Boston Celtics versus the Los Angeles Lakers from 1959 to 1969. The Celtics and the Lakers met each other 7 times in the NBA Finals, and 7 times did the Celtics beat the Lakers. This was part of a run of 8 straight championships, 11 championships in 13 seasons for the Boston Celtics, which included a run of 8 in a row. The Celtics clearly outperforming the Lakers at every aspect. You think about the opportunities the Lakers had to win a championship. 62, Frank Selvey took a shot that would have won the game for the Lakers and the championship, but it missed, and the game went into overtime. Boston won. In 65, the Celtics, of course, getting the better end, winning that one. The Los Angeles Lakers overcoming a 3-1 deficit in 1966 to force Game 7, but Bill Russell and the Celtics winning that one as well. Then in 1968, the Lakers denied again, which set up a big opportunity for them to make a big trade to acquire Wilt Chamberlain, who was traded to join Jerry West and Elgin Baylor. And the Lakers had a better team, but Boston pushed them to another Game 7. And LA was so confident that they were going to win that they already had party plans. They were going to celebrate after the game. They were so confident. But Boston said, nah. Let's remember the script. We're a bunch of people from Boston and Irishmen. You are from the Lakers, who can't beat us. You will not beat us. And true to form, Boston won that game in dramatic style, and they won to make it 7 championships over the Lakers as well. And obviously the Lakers wouldn't have their 9th opportunity to beat those Celtics finally, but that era from 59 to 69, it is arguably the biggest one-sided rivalry in all of professional sports. So, recapping my list. At number 10, the Detroit Red Wings and the St. Louis Blues from 96 to 2002. Number 9, the Dallas Cowboys versus the Minnesota Vikings in the 70s. Number 8, The Warriors against the Rockets from 2015 to 2018. Number 7, the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs from 2013 to this year. Number 6, the Astros and the Yankees from 2015 to 22. Number 5, the Islanders versus the Rangers from 1975 to 1984. Number 4, Sugar Ray Robinson versus Jake LaMotta from 42 to 51. Number 3, the Yankees and the Dodgers from 1941 to 56. Number 2, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain throughout their entire careers. And number 1, the Celtics and the Lakers from 1959 to 1969. That is what we like to call one-sided rivalries. Some fans like it, others, well, most fans don't, because in order for it to really be a rivalry, both teams have to win. And I do agree with that sentiment as well. So, that is going to conclude the first segment. When we come back, we're going to talk some J.J. Watt. He's been in the news lately. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. Over the past weekend, J.J. Watt hosted his annual charity softball game down in Sugar Land, home of the Sugar Land Space Cowboys, which is the AAA affiliate for the Houston Astros. And basically, the charity softball game has donations that go to the J.J. Watt Foundation, and it features players for the Texans on both offense and defense. So, a real fun atmosphere for all the fans to go out and see a couple of football players play baseball, or in this case softball for that matter. And it's always a great time, especially for fans to see J.J. Watt, even when the years he was in Arizona for playing for the Arizona Cardinals. But we all know that J.J. Watt is a true Houston Texans legend all the way. And for what he did in the community and for how he impacted the franchise, he's a true icon, and he's now in the Ring of Honor for that matter. So J.J. Watt is a Houston Texans legend. But with that being said, after the game, he was talking to media reporters, and one of the reporters asked a question of the possibility of him returning to the Houston Texans, especially for this season. And this is what J.J. Watt had to say afterwards.
Temptation.
Oh, I mean, I'm a very fortunate, lucky man. I got a beautiful wife, I got a beautiful son. I've had 12 great years in this league, and I'm very thankful to have walked away healthy and playing great. I told D'Amico last year, I said, don't call unless you absolutely need it, but if you ever do call, I'll be there. And he knows not to call unless he absolutely needs it. This is the last year I'll tell him that, because I'm not going to keep training the way I've been training, but he knows that if he ever truly does need it, I'll be there for him. But I don't anticipate that happening. They got a very good crew.
So you're saying if 4 defensive ends go down by week 12, there's a possibility that you're stepping up?
I very much don't want that to ever be the case. Yes, I hope that everybody stays extremely healthy and they dominate and they don't need any other bodies, and I just get to watch and enjoy it.
Basically, J.J. Watt just said that he is still in football shape and is considering coming back to play, but only if D'Amico Ryans, the head coach for the Texans, gives him a call and absolutely needs it. And I gotta tell you what, when I first heard this, there was a part of me that was like, oh man, J.J. Watt coming back to join the Houston Texans at the right time. That is, without question, something that would give a lot of fans even more excitement, given what the Texans have turned themselves into, especially with the last few seasons. So I'm thinking to myself, this would be really great for J.J. Watt to come back. But then there's that other side of me is wondering, is it really a good idea for him to do this? Maybe he's just saying that as a kind of a smoke screen, as some sort of cover-up for that matter. I mean, we've seen athletes tease stuff all the time. We've seen them possibly coming out of retirement or teasing the possibility of coming out of retirement. I mean, you know how many times Brett Favre has done that throughout his entire career. Same thing with maybe Tom Brady, who retired once and then he's like, I think I'm going to come back for one more year. And then he does so, which I think was probably the reason why he and his ex-wife are no longer together. But you had that, and then, just other players teasing some things, giving fans a false sense of hope. And I'm not saying J.J. Watt is doing that. I think J.J. feels that he could still play, and he is willing to help out, but only in the event that D'Amico Ryans calls him up. And so, the more I think about this, I'm trying to decide what's the wise thing here. What is the ideal situation for J.J. Watt to return to the Texans? Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea? And I kept thinking about this for time to time, and I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what are the pros of J.J. Watt coming back to join the Houston Texans, and what are the cons of him coming back? So I thought about this a lot, and I came up with 3 reasons each. I'm going to start with the pros of J.J. Watt coming back to the Texans, why I think this is a good idea, and then I'm going to go into the reasons why I don't think this is a good idea. So, this is, to me, the reasons why I think J.J. Watt returning to the Texans is a very good idea. Number 1, this would be the last chance for J.J. Watt to win a Super Bowl. I think every athlete that plays football has a dream of getting to the NFL, and I think even fewer players have that dream of winning a Super Bowl. And it's unfortunate that there's only a select few talented players that have that opportunity. Even the great ones that don't get a chance to play in a Super Bowl, people like Barry Sanders, Dan Fouts, I'm trying to think of another player that missed out on the opportunity to play in the Super Bowl. And then you have the guys that haven't won a Super Bowl. Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, the list goes on and on. Randy Moss, guys that were talented, Hall of Fame players that just never had that chance of making it to the Super Bowl, or actually not even winning a Super Bowl when they had their appearances in there as well. I think J.J. Watt still has that feeling that he wanted to win a Super Bowl. Now, I've heard some people say that the reason why he joined Arizona was not for the ring chasing, but for, just for the money's sake. If he wanted to chase a ring, he could have gone to the Patriots, he could have gone to the Kansas City Chiefs, or he could have gone to the 49ers when D'Amico Ryans was still the defensive coordinator there. Instead, he chose to join the Arizona Cardinals, but people tend to forget the Cardinals were actually a very good team and had a legitimate chance of making the Super Bowl. I mean, you already had DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver, who was expected to help Kyler Murray out. Arizona was a legitimate threat to win the NFC West, but they kind of faltered down the stretch, and they ended up losing in the first round game to the eventual champion, Los Angeles Rams. And that was really the last best chance for J.J. Watt to win. And it became clear he wasn't going to win a Super Bowl with Arizona, and that's why he ended up retiring the very next year. But I would say that J.J. Watt still has that desire to win a Super Bowl, and it almost makes me think of when Dusty Baker was hired by the Astros to be the manager. Now, I talked about this with my brother, and when Dusty Baker was first hired by the Astros to be a manager, they were in some serious trouble. Their reputation had been tainted. They had lost a lot of respect from everybody, even their own fan base. And many people believe that, Dusty Baker's only hired just to be a mainstay, just to keep the ship afloat and not make sure that things get worse. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that as great of a manager as he is, he has not won a World Series championship in his previous attempt. This was his last chance of doing it to win a championship, and this was probably the best team he was going to have. And sure enough, Dusty Baker wound up winning a championship for the team, and in some ways really changed the reputations of that franchise to prove that, hey, they didn't need any extra stuff. And I still will defend that to this day, that they would have still won in 2017. So deal with it, Dodger fans. They didn't need to do that, but they still would have won the whole thing regardless. But back to my point of J.J. Watt. I think if J.J. Watt still has that desire to win a Super Bowl, he would certainly do so with a contender. You would think that he would join the Kansas City Chiefs or the 49ers or maybe the Philadelphia Eagles for some defensive help. But I just think that it's hard for anyone for J.J. Watt who's still to play for another team, unlike the Houston Texans as well. And that brings me to my second reason why he would want to return to the game and play for the Texans. He would be joining a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Now, a year ago, if you were to ask me if J.J. Watt to the Texans was a possibility, I would have laughed right in your face because the Texans were not a good team. Nobody expected them to have the season that they had, even though they had drafted C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson Jr., and there was no way the Texans were seen as contenders. You knew they were going to be better, you just didn't know how much. But now all of a sudden, you win the AFC South Division, you then add key players in the offseason on both offense and defense, and all of a sudden you have people giving you praise, saying that, hey, you might be the best opportunity to knock off the Kansas City Chiefs. Although that's a bit of a stretch to say at this point because you still have the Bills, you still have the Bengals, you still have the Ravens as probably the top three teams to have a chance to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, even though all three of them have not done so at this point. Well, the Bengals did a few years back, but still, they're one of the top teams. The Texans are seen as an up-and-coming team, but you have a legitimate contender because you have a franchise quarterback who won Rookie of the Year on offense. And the Texans are doing everything they can to stack up the talent around him in the 3 years he has left on his rookie contract because who knows what's going to happen afterwards. Fans are hoping that C.J. Stroud can still re-sign with the team and play well, but you never know. He's got 3 more years to prove that he is worthy of being a franchise quarterback. Otherwise, he might be going elsewhere to have that success. And then on the defensive side, you have Will Anderson Jr., again, leading the pack defensively, being named Defensive Rookie of the Year. You also added a guy like Danielle Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings. And then the defensive secondary still have Derek Stingley Jr., Jalen Petre's there. I know he had a bit of a sophomore slump, but you add him. You also have Jimmy Ward again. And then you added guys in a draft pick. Kamari Laster, questionable pick, but I think he's one of the best guys in the draft. He didn't allow a single touchdown in his entire collegiate career. So what you have here is a contender, and J.J. Watt would certainly add to that, even though there are reasons why it just wouldn't be the same as it was when he was playing. But certainly you have a guy that can only help out the defense on the team, be a leader for that franchise. So that way you can help elevate the defense to be one of the best in all of the NFL. And then the third reason why I think J.J. Watt joining the Texans at this point is a good idea is because he wants to end his Texans career on the right note. Now, yes, he is in the Ring of Honor, and he is still beloved by the Texans, but you have to remember, when he left, it was not a good time. It was under bad circumstances. He and head coach Bill O'Brien had gotten into a tiff during, I want to say it was the 2020 season, which was really one of the most frustrating periods. It was a frustrating period to be a Texans fan. The last image of J.J. Watt before he left the Cardinals was his irate press conference where he was talking about how certain players were not showing up and dedicating themselves to do anything, and how he was really upset and disappointed that they couldn't get a championship for the city of Houston, who really deserved it. And it was really tough for J.J. Watt and the Texans because that was a wasted opportunity in that 2020 season. And by that point, the Texans were going to be in a rebuilding mode, and I know he didn't want to be a part of that, so he ended up leaving to go to Arizona. And that was kind of a negative end towards his tenure with the Texans. And yes, he didn't have a good ending to his career, not being able to get far into the playoffs, but I think having him return to the NFL would certainly benefit and have a good outcome for his career. Now, it's hard to say, even if he does come back, that the Texans will win a Super Bowl, but I think it would be a happier ending to his Texans tenure, aside from him being inducted into the Ring of Honor, and he's still a legend that is deserving of it. And the other thing that I was thinking about is how many players that are in the Ring of Honor actually come back and play for the team. Not many guys. I mean, we think of Michael Jordan returning after being retired for a year and a half. They actually retired his jersey number for that period. And then Jordan comes back after some certain time and has that second half of his great career. And, he retires again, then goes to play for the Wizards and all that. But how many guys do you see that happening in the NFL? That is another thing that I think a lot of people will definitely like to see in J.J. Watt. Just the opportunity to show that he could still play. Because you look at him, and you look at him on TV or an analyst, there's a part of him that still thinks he can play. So that's why you hear him say, I'm still working out and all that, although this is the last year I'm going to get into football shape just in case I'm ready. And if D'Amico calls and needs me, then I'll be ready for sure to help out as possible. So those are the reasons why I think J.J. Watt should come back to join the Texans. But then again, there is that question of, why shouldn't he come back? Well, number one, he hasn't come back he hasn't played in a few years. Now, it's one thing if you have an injury and you miss an entire season and you're trying to work out to get back. But it's another thing when you haven't done any football-related activities. I'm not talking about like lifting weights or working out or doing your off-season training and all that. I'm talking about getting on the field in actual pads, hitting guys and hitting the dummies and doing everything as a defensive player. I haven't seen clips of him doing that for the past few years. All I've seen J.J. Watt do is be an analyst and, doing his other entrepreneurial stuff as well as being the owner of a football team, English Premier Football team, although I think we should call it soccer regardless of what they say overseas. Still, it's hard because football is kind of a different sport, unlike basketball, where you might show some rust and everything. I mean, case in point with Deshaun Watson. I know it's different circumstances. He was suspended for 11 games. He missed an entire season for the Texans because of all the situation with the coaching and the general manager. And then, of course, the sexual allegations and everything, which kind of has derailed his career. And we saw how rusty he was when he was with Cleveland, and then he got hurt. So he's never really had a full season to develop as a Cleveland Browns quarterback. But if you miss some time, you're going to have some rust. And it's hard to know if you're ever going to be at that same level that you were in. Number two, he's got commitments elsewhere. He is an analyst on CBS Sports doing the NFL broadcast. He's also a minority owner of the English club Burnley. And it's a different process with what's happening right now. And you sometimes have to wonder, how in the world can he transition from what he's done, for what he's currently doing right now for both CBS Sports and for Burnley, into playing for the NFL? It's really hard for me to envision that, because your mind, you obviously want to see your team do well, but you have to make some quick adjustments. Now, he has said that this is his last year of working out and trying to stay in football shape, because if he doesn't hear anything, then he's not even going to bother. That's why he basically told D'Amico Ryans, look, this is my last year. If you need me, call me. And I think D'Amico Ryans knows what is best for the team, even if that means, not being able to call J.J. Watt. I just think J.J.'s got a lot on his mind at this point, that playing for the Texans would certainly not be at the best one, at the top of the list. But because he's a family man. He's got a great wife. He's got a son. And, he's living a life that he should be enjoying. And the last thing you want is for him to take away time from what he's doing in focusing it on playing at least a few games for the Texans, if need be, because it would only be for a small part of that season. If something were to happen to a defensive pass rusher, like one of the pass rushers gets injured and is lost for the rest of the season, okay, who are you going to call? Well, you call someone for a practice squad. Well, what if that practice squad player gets injured? Now who are you going to call? You call J.J. Watt. This may be the perfect time for you, but what if J.J. is in the middle of something happening, like he's at a function, or he's broadcasting, he's doing something for CBS Sports, he's interviewing a player or talking about his thoughts on an analyst, and all of a sudden he gets a phone call. Are you going to break the flow of what you're doing just to rejoin the team and join it immediately, you're not guaranteed to play the rest of the season. So, to avoid the flow, J.J. Watt should at least consider staying out of the limelight or stay out of the possibility of playing for the franchise at this time, given that he's got to do all these other activities, from owning a team to being an analyst on CBS Sports, as I said. So I just think with too much on his mind, it would be even more hard for him to stay away or come back and play for a franchise. And then the third reason I think J.J. Watt coming back would be a bad idea is the defense itself. It would be nice to help the defense out, but I just think the Texans will have a great defense this upcoming season. Will Anderson Jr. is still coming back. You have Danielle Hunter in the mix. You added all the other linebackers and all the players in there. I just think it would take away from what the defense is doing. And I don't think the last thing JJ would want is to be a distraction for this, to be a marketing team, or to market himself as a defensive player, the lead defensive player. He's no longer going to be the face of the Texans franchise defense. That's going to go to Will Anderson Jr. And to see J.J. Watt come back, even if it's for a few games, it almost feels like a promotion where, hey, guess what? You sign a one-day contract for one game, and you're going to play at least 1 to 2 snaps. And then you'll spend most of the time on the sideline as all the other players are enjoying it. That sounds like a minor league deal. It's almost like a famous baseball player who retired some years ago comes back and plays for a lower level independent team and draws the attention just to get people to put their asses in the seats. And that's not what I think J.J. Watt wants to do. So, you think back to all the stuff about whether or not J.J. is possibly coming back to the NFL or not. I mean, whether he says that as an option, but I think J.J. knows what's best for him, and I think the franchise knows what's best for their team at this point. And as much as we all love J.J. Watt, as much as we all appreciate everything he did for the franchise and the community of Houston, I think the best thing for him to do is not to even worry about coming back. I think he should stay retired. He's got a great wife. He's got a son. He's doing well at this point. Continue to host your softball game. Continue to own Burnley and continue to be an analyst. Continue to do you. Do the things that you might not have had an opportunity to do when you were playing. So I think he should just enjoy the life he's got. Now, the only way I would see J.J. Watt come back to the Texans is if he did so as a special advisor role. Kind of like what Andre Johnson is doing. It's not like you're going to be an assistant coach, and it's not like you're going to be a person that is going to be on the coaching staff or just somebody to motivate the team. On occasion, J.J. Watt might be called to talk to the team about things or give them some tips and advice, but not necessarily to be a coaching role. Maybe J.J. Watt will be a coach one of these days. I don't know. But for me, to see J.J. Watt in a uniform, as much as that would be appealing, I think it wouldn't necessarily lead to much anything. Now, I will say this. If the Texans do win a Super Bowl, he and Andre Johnson should get a ring. At least get a ring. I know they wouldn't be playing, but I think there should be an exception to have everyone on that squad get a ring, including J.J. Watt and Andre Johnson. So my thoughts are, I think for this particular occasion, J.J. Watt should stay retired, and because you don't want to do anything that would hurt this team and hurt his reputation. Well, not necessarily hurt his reputation, but certainly you don't want to put yourself in more harm or give people a false sense of hope that you're going to come back and you're going to be this incredible player. You might look like you could still play and you could still dominate, but you don't want to give this false hope. So I just think J.J. Watt should stay retired, and I think the Texans are going to be fine even without him. So, but that's not to say that I don't particularly think it's a bad idea. I mean, if he does decide to come back, then that's good for him, but I just would not necessarily do that. So, that is my thoughts on J.J. Watt's situation, whether he comes back or not. I think he should stay retired, but then again, I'm not J.J. Watt. If I was, then I would have a different opinion. But that is my thoughts on the whole matter, and folks, we are going to step aside. When we come back, I give my final thoughts on this episode. Stay tuned. As I conclude this episode of Crocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock, got a few announcements or a few updates from the sports world. In the NBA playoffs, just now, the New York Knicks have defeated the Indiana Pacers 121-117 to win Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. So that's a real exciting time for the Knicks fans. As a matter of fact, if you were to ask me who I think is going to go to the conference finals for both the Eastern and Western, I got the Knicks and the Boston Celtics moving on, and I have the Denver Nuggets and, regretfully, the Dallas Mavericks advancing to the Western Conference Finals. But I'm not counting out Minnesota. I think Minnesota could be a legitimate threat as well, but still, it is going to be interesting to see how the NBA playoffs play out. So, man, hard to tell who would win, because years ago it used to be Golden State versus everybody, or Golden State, LeBron, and everyone else, but now it's just becoming crazy and unpredictable. What is not unpredictable is that I will be posting this episode on Podbean along with my YouTube channel, so you'll have two avenues to listen to this podcast. And hey, listen, feel free to comment down below. Let me know if there's anything I need to change or correct here on the podcast. Don't be afraid to give me some good tips, some praise, and some criticisms. I'm just doing all I can to get into this podcasting business myself, even though I already have another podcast with my co-host, Mark T. Robinson, and we'll have another podcast of that coming out next month. But for the time being, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. And listen, if you have any different opinions on my top 10 one-sided rivalries list, just let me know. And then give me your thoughts on the whole J.J. Watt situation. Is he coming back, or is it just for show to give people a false sense of hope? But anyways, in the meantime, I hope you guys have yourself a great day, and I will see y'all next time on the episode of Crocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.